Hello, and welcome to another episode from Season 6 of The Horrific Podcast. We're two friends who live in different places but share a passion for scary movies. Each week we pick a different horror movie and dissect it to figure out what it was trying to accomplish, how well it did, and maybe even some larger truths about why people watch horror movies in the first place. This season we're changing things up. We're devoting a whole season to reviewing Esquire's list of the 50 scariest movies of all time. In each episode, we'll break down a different movie, talk about how scary it really was, and then update our rankings to prove how much smarter we are than the other people on the internet. Thanks for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the conversation.
Huddle up, my friend.
What is that?
I don't know, man. I think it's called schizophrenia or something like that.
Well, that kind of fits this movie.
Yeah, man.
At the grocery store the other day, I heard a country song, and it was like, I'm just a beer drinker, and it was talking about having like a callus on your finger from popping the tab.
Jesus Christ.
And how he's always got a 12-pack in his cooler. And I'm just like, okay.
Alcoholism. It's great. Yeah, there's two things. One, have we talked about the Bo Durham, or Bo... What is it? Bo Burnham?
Burnham? What about him?
Have you, his country song?
I don't think so.
Okay. I'm setting a reminder now. I'm gonna send it to you because
Okay.
it's like it's on point. And the second thing is Tyler Childers came out with a new album.
Oh yeah.
I think Friday.
Oh nice. And
it's
he's the one
not,
that you sent me a while back that you said you were going to see.
It's not bad, but like that dude, it's insane, dude. It's not like the modern country, like bro country that's out. And so it's just like this guy, he's so fucking talented.
He doesn't have any
insane.
Like rap breakdowns or anything.
Exactly. Yeah. And like there's like actual meaning behind every song, it seems.
Yeah.
You're like a storyteller and stuff, but it literally blows my mind how talented I feel like he is. It doesn't comprehend, because like he can sing, he can write, and he can play guitar, and it's just like, holy crap.
I still go back. I mean, like when I have that itch, I still go back to Blue Edmondson.
Yeah.
And I feel like he's very much in the same vein. Yeah. And that guy was so good. But I get weird about bands that I care a lot about, and I'll like deep stalk them on the internet. And he's still doing some stuff very occasionally, but he hadn't released any new music in a long time. And because I still remember seeing him in at Bob's, that little side stage at Cane's that they opened for like the smaller shows. And man, that was so good. That was one of the best live sets I've ever seen. And he was so on it, and the band was so tight. Like it was really, really good. And then I saw him probably 2 years later in Denton, and man, it was rough. Like,
oh, really?
His voice just didn't work for like the first 2/3 of the set. And then I guess after he drank enough whiskey, he got back into it and then was finally like able to sing the songs. Yeah. But it was just sad. I mean, that first part was just really sad to watch because he's so talented. But
yeah. I think that's the same. I mean, because it's like, I feel like Tyler's in the whole John Moreland, Bo, just that whole kind of category where it's not the necessarily red dirt or Texas country, but it's just like authentic country. Like it's not like old timey, but it's authentic to the person. So
it almost fits more in like a sort of an outlaw folk, more so than it does like more of like the modern radio country type stuff, which I like. So how do we transition from that into?
Oh, is it recording?
Yeah.
Oh, that's my bad.
That's no worries. Oh, no, good stuff.
Yeah. I feel like, so I can transition into it. Okay. I feel like if our podcast was about music, it would just be too easy. We're going the hard route and working into horror movies. Yeah. So this week we're doing M.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and so M, to me, so full disclosure, so far we're working our way through Esquire's list of the 50 scariest movies of all time, and we'd already reviewed a bunch of them, so we're just doing the ones we haven't done yet. The first couple of weeks of that were rough, and like, I didn't know what to expect watching M, because it was made in 1931, and our previous experience with movies from around that time were Dracula and Frankenstein. And those were both good, but they definitely weren't, like, scary. Frankenstein is a great movie, but it's, because of the production at the time and the limitations of the technology and the filming and everything else, it just wasn't a scary movie on any level.
Right, yeah.
And so I was expecting M to be on a similar caliber as far as production and acting and everything else, and I was actually kind of pleasantly surprised by it.
I was too. Yeah, absolutely. The movie like gets a lot deeper as far as like techniques and things that they do in production. That blew my mind. Yes. I mean, I just wasn't ready for it.
Yeah, I felt like it was very, very advanced for a movie from 1931, and it was actually the director's first non-silent film, which I thought was interesting.
I saw that.
Because we talk about how with a lot of those early movies, it feels more like you're watching a recording of a play than like an actual movie made with modern technique. But I felt like this one did have a lot of things that were sort of more modern from a production standpoint, and it wasn't just the camera on the edge of the stage during the play. Right. It was like made more like you would expect a movie to be, and so that was kind of cool. But yeah, I thought it was really interesting. I feel like it did a lot of things, because obviously, I mean, it's an old movie. Technology was limited. It wasn't, I don't think being scary was the number one priority of it. It had a larger message it was trying to convey. But it did a lot of things like from a, I guess you'd say like strategy perspective of like creating the mood and creating the tension and creating the mystery that a lot of movies since then have copied. And so it was kind of cool to see like the early version of that.
Yeah, and I think with this movie, it definitely had some horror aspects to it.
Yeah.
It's definitely I had never seen it before. I've never seen this movie before, and it almost kind of blew my mind that I hadn't, because of I hadn't really even heard of it.
Yeah, same.
And and after watching it and not being like a student of film or anything, it's like, how is this not like, on multiple like greatest movies of all time? Just from like how they consider this was done. Like, I saw 1931 and I saw 1933. But so this was done basically like 4 years after they started having sound in movies. And the techniques that they used are techniques that I saw happen in The Haunting of Hill House on Netflix. It's like, what the heck?
Yeah, for sure. And one thing that, I haven't read it anywhere, but I feel like the directors and writers of Silence of the Lambs had to have been influenced by this movie. Yeah. Like, the villain in this movie, I feel like became a caricature or an archetype for future horror movie villains, which I thought was really cool. Because, again, I was not expecting that based on how kind of terrible the last two movies on this list had been. But anyway. But yeah, I'm going to introduce it, and then we'll get it down to the rest of the episode.
Cool.
In 1931, director Fritz Lang, who may or may not be related to your arch nemesis Russell Lang,
probably is,
released
he's a terrible person.
Released his first non-silent film, a German murder thriller called M. This movie focuses on the actions of a child murderer in the city of Berlin. Both the police and organized crime realize this is bad for the city and set out to catch the killer. As the hunter becomes the hunted, the film offers an insightful look into justice, mercy, and morality. This movie has received generally positive reviews from critics over time and is still making it onto lists of all-time best movies. It has been remade as a Hollywood film set in Los Angeles, as a radio show, and as a graphic novel. It can currently be rented for streaming on Amazon Prime Video. So,
very, very good.
What did you learn about this movie?
So, there's a couple things I learned about this movie. Sorry, I just got angry thinking about it.
Oh, no, that was just a great setup.
So, Fritz Lang, I guess apparently he was known for being cruel to his actors. I read this on multiple reports. So, like,
he probably is related to Russell.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, that's why when you said it, I was like, yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely. But he, like, threw down Peter Lorre. Peter Lorre was thrown downstairs multiple times. I think it says like over a dozen times. I've also read 10 times, so I'm gonna say 11. And I guess it was so bad, like the way that he treated the actors, that Peter Lorre was asked to be in a movie years later. So in 1954, he was asked to be in a movie called Human Desire, and he refused to do it just from how
just wouldn't work with that director.
Right. Yeah. So another thing, that I found kind of interesting, just to think about, like, this was done in Germany, right? And Peter Lorre was Jewish and fled Germany in fear of the Nazi persecution shortly after the movie's release.
Oh wow.
Fritz Lang was actually half Jewish, and he fled 2 years later as well. And it's just kind of crazy to think about, like, I don't know, just putting real life.
Yeah, well, and that was weird to me too, in that this movie came from Germany in 1931, whereas in my mind, 1931 Germany was in this, like, huge political upheaval. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So to have something that was, like, this artistic and this, like, well done just didn't really fit with, like, my idea of that place at that time. So yeah, it definitely is interesting to think about, real human history in parallel to the movie history, I guess.
Trying to throw in, like, the horror that was going on at the same time, and here's another fact that I think is just this is probably the craziest fact that I've ever said. And it's a lot of, there's a lot of ammo behind that, or punch behind that. But in Germany, the Nazis banned the movie in July 1934.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Because of, the content of the movie. And it's like, the Nazis banned this movie. Like, the worst group of people, one of the worst groups of people, banned this movie. And it's like, what the heck? Like, the thinking just blows my mind behind it. But anyway, I won't get too in depth. So as you kind of said, this is Fritz Lang's first sound film with sound. Let's see. Okay, here's another one that I read, that this was based on an article Fritz read about a serial killer named Peter Kuerten, Kuerten, from Dusseldorf. The details, like, specifically about, the story had changed, but some of the things resembled some of the things in the movie actually resembled part of the story of Peter Kuerten.
Interesting.
Okay, here's another cool one. Fritz Lang asserts that he cast real criminals for the court scene in the end, and according to a biographer, Paul Jensen, 24 cast members were arrested during filming because he had actual criminals at the court scene at the end.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I thought that was like, what? Like, people just show up?
Yeah.
Stupid.
Wait, could you imagine, like, putting out a Craigslist ad, like, wanted criminals wanted?
Yeah. Exactly. And then actual criminals being like, yeah, I'll do it. Sure.
That's an easy way to make $50.
Yeah. Okay, another one. Peter Lorre. So he plays the antagonist, right?
He was the killer?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, we're doing sport. Yeah. So Peter Lorre, who was the killer, he couldn't whistle well. So the whistling which the song that they whistled was "In the Hall of the Mountain King," heard in the film, was actually done by Fritz himself. Although the director had no musical talent, he felt his own off-key whistling very appropriate.
Yeah, but that explains, because the whistling never looked like it was coming from anyone on the screen, and early in the movie that threw me off, because I thought that it was the homeless guy selling the balloons that was whistling, because it didn't look like any of the other actors were doing it. But
towards the camera. Yeah. So those are the main facts that I have about that movie.
Nice. Yeah, it was interesting, and I've also read that the director considers this like by far his best work.
Oh yeah,
and I think that I would agree. I mean, like as someone watching this movie in 2019, there were still a lot of things I really liked about it and was pleasantly surprised by, and for that to be the case, all these years later, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, I think so.
And I did like that it had a lot of sort of the classic things, like the things that are almost like nostalgic about watching a movie like Frankenstein, like the hand-drawn credits in the beginning. Like I just love that. It's so different than what you see today.
Yeah.
And it definitely was, I mentioned before, like a lot of it was kind of set up like a play, like characters coming on and off screen, and the camera was just like on a stand that could swivel left and right and zoom in but didn't actually move. And it gave the whole thing a feeling like you were just standing in the corner watching, which actually was kind of perfect for a lot of this movie. But they also did a lot of these big overhead shots, which I feel like you didn't see a lot of at this time. But I did notice that there was typically no sound when they were doing that. So I don't know if it was just because of the camera or like it was too hard to go back and edit in extra sound or what. But that was it threw me off a little bit when I was first watching before I realized what was going on. Like I thought my sound was going out or there was a problem with the stream.
Yeah, I thought the exact same thing. Like there's a long part that no sound at all. Yeah. Like you could kind of hear a little bit of like a hiss, and I was like, what the heck? Paused and went through, because I legit thought that the sound was messed up on it.
Yeah. But if you think back at the time where everybody's used to watching silent movies, it probably didn't stand out as much then.
Right.
But it was just kind of weird now. And there really wasn't a ton of like Foley or music in this movie. It was really just kind of people talking or, a lot of quiet.
Yeah. Or just the whistle. Yeah. They used silence, quite a bit.
Yeah. And there were a couple of pretty like rough edits and some parts where the sound was pretty like unevenly mixed, but overall the production was good, and it kind of just helped tell the story. Like it a lot of movies, it feels like the limitations of the technology hurt the movie, but in this one it was kind of like the movie was presented with that in mind, and so they just used what they had to create the feeling and the style that they wanted, and I think for the most part it worked pretty well.
Yeah, I think with this movie it has a lot of like this. I think one of the reasons why the production worked as well as it did, like some of the cutscenes and why it worked as well, is also the story that came from as well, and that was all done by Fritz. So it's kind of crazy to think about that. It makes you wonder. For me, it made me wonder, like, did this guy have like actual technique he was doing, or was he just like, screw it, let's try to do this and see how it looks,
Yeah. Well, and the movie did a lot of things to try and be scary, but they weren't really sort of the standard ones. So it was mostly around like tension and suspense. It wasn't, gore. It wasn't a lot of intense violence. It was just more about sort of the feel and mood and the mystery of it. And I think that maybe hurt it a little bit from an intensity perspective, because you never felt like scared for your life. You did feel, I guess, kind of some empathy for some of the kids in the movie, like when the way that they introduced that whistle as being associated with danger early, and then they would like play it later. I think that was effective, but I also never felt like, oh crap, I need to turn the lights on before I go to bed or anything like that, So
no, and I think it also adds like the other, I guess, horror aspect of it would be the fact that like when something like that is going on and you don't know who it is, you suspect everyone.
Yeah.
And so that's where you kind of get the witch hunt aspect from the movie. And I think that adds kind of a scarier part, because it's like, what are these people going to do? Like that guy in one scene, that guy was just saying, hello to, or giving the time to a girl, I think, or something like that. And like it just turned on him immediately. And like police came, and it was that was also a scary aspect of what could actually happen even nowadays,
Yeah. And they definitely played up like the social aspect of it. Like that was a huge part of the movie, and it was people turning on each other, competing groups looking for the killer, the way that people were willing to basically drop their humanity when approaching the concept of the killer. Like it really was developing a lot of themes beyond just a murder mystery. So
yeah.
But I like the way that they introduced the murder. So like in the beginning, it was just like the concept of it, or like the rumor of it. And there was that scene where they showed the reward poster. So like there was the kid playing with the ball on the sidewalk, and the camera's like following that, and then she gets close enough to that pole, and then the camera kind of pans up and you see the poster that's like the reward poster for catching the killer.
Yeah.
And then the shadow falls across it, and like that's the shadow of the killer, like looking down on that girl on the sidewalk. And I thought that was just such a great setup with what they had technology wise, the limitations of the movement of the camera and technology and everything else. It was just a really, really good introduction that set the tone that they wanted for the rest of the movie.
Yeah, because I think a lot of the times and I've talked about this a lot of the times, was if you see the villain too soon, or the monster too soon, it almost kind of ruins it. It didn't necessarily do that for me this time, because it was kind of like a catch, and trying to catch him and seeing if he's ahead of the game, or figure out why he's doing it. And so it didn't ruin the movie for me, seeing it early on.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that the killer in this movie was the thing that stood out to me most. The way that they developed and created that character, I feel like, was so unique from a lot of the other things that I saw in movies around this time. And he did so many things that have just been copied a billion times since then. Like even that letter where he's talking about, because the police did not publish my first letter, I'm now writing directly to the press. Like, I feel like even real life has copied that. Like that's a thing, like the Zodiac killer and stuff.
BTK killer.
Yeah, but that, you never heard about that happening before this movie. And then they go to like the handwriting analyst, and he's bringing up like sexual pathology and the sort of the idea of, this isn't just a person choosing to be bad. It's a person with some sort of mental disorder that is causing him to compulsively do these killings. And that is where I really saw a lot of overlap between like this movie and Silence of the Lambs, in that it wasn't just it wasn't like the person was killing to try and rob people and get money or to assume political power or anything. It was more of a like psychological villain, which I think everything from comic books to horror movies to New York Times best-selling murder mystery novels have developed that. And I just don't know of any examples of anything like that happening before this movie.
Yeah, and it's crazy to think about, like, how, like, with killers and serial killers, how like that's such a common thing to write. Like, it just, even nowadays, and they say I think it's because like the God aspect, or like the, what do they call that when you're
like narcissism?
Narcissists, yeah. They say that's tied to definitely serial killers. So like with the BTK killer that was in Kansas, like he was so caught up that he couldn't be caught, that he was toying with the police and doing all that. And it's just so if you see a movie that comes out nowadays and you see that, it's like, well, okay, that's like common because of this, but that was 1931 when this came out. So which is probably maybe in books before then, but that turned into like an actual police, like a thing that the police use. Like they that's a technique that they workaround now because of how common it was with serial killers. So.
Yeah, like understanding the psychology of the killer and then using that as a way to like identify or negotiate with them. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, it was interesting. I feel like they did some really cool stuff just with the scenes in general. Like there were a couple where you had somebody on the phone like describing to another person how the investigation had gone, and then they basically are showing a montage of scenes about the investigation.
Yeah.
So like in a sense the person just becomes a narrator for a long period of time of like actual investigation that's condensed for the movie. So like it moves the story along really quickly but doesn't rely a lot on the sound or the acting to sell it, which I thought worked really well for this movie. It would kind of give you the sense that, wow, they really are going out there and doing a lot to try and investigate, but it's not like the mundane details of people going door to door and having to talk to each other.
Yeah, I mean, there was one of the scenes that I was specifically talking about that reminded me of Haunting of Hill House is they were talking, so they're talking in person, and it cuts to the left, so they're talking, it cuts to the left, and I think it goes on like a window, it goes to like a window, and then that goes, so it goes from center to left while they're talking, explaining about this situation, and then it goes to the window, and then it starts a new scene from that window and goes on to the next one, like it was one continuous shot.
Oh, that one they were going back and forth between like the police and then like the criminal gang? So they're having like a conversation about the killer at the same time, and it's almost like a continuous shot that just transitions back and forth between the two, and it's showing how similar they are in a lot of ways.
Right. Yeah. That was a really cool idea.
Yeah. And it was pulled off well too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then kind of like you were saying before, I do think it was interesting that they chose to show the villain early on, and it was interesting in that he was super creepy but also super normal. Like, he wasn't supernatural or super powered, he was just very mentally ill, and that of course played into a lot of the larger themes of the movie and points it was trying to make, but also, I don't know, just like how normal he looked. Because we talk about like, oh yeah, we don't like it as much when the killer takes off his mask early, because then you realize it's just a normal person and that makes him less scary. In this case, I think it made him more scary because he was just so average that you wouldn't look at that guy and think twice if he was walking down the street. So the idea of like just the killer among us type thing, I think was part of the overall mood or uneasiness that the movie was trying to create.
Yeah, and he had those eyes. That'll freak you out, where like they open up super wide and seem like they're sticking out.
But there was one scene where I did feel like a little bit of anxiety, and oddly enough, and I'm curious what your take is on this, it was on behalf of the killer. So when the criminal gang was searching the attic and going like room to room, and you knew he was there hiding, and he was in the very last room, and you knew that the cops were on the way and that all of the criminals would leave as soon as the cops got there, and you could see the killer just like huddled and just looking like a scared animal in that last room, and you could hear them breaking in the doors, getting closer and closer. That was a super intense scene, but they were making you feel empathy for the killer, which was so backwards. It was so weird. I felt very conflicted about it.
Yeah, no, I thought the exact same thing. Like, it's like, well, you know that this guy is a killer, right? So he's killing children. Yeah. But he's... And it could just be that we don't exactly know what's happening, what's going to happen to him at that point. Like, it's like, are they just going to kill him? It's going to be over with. What's going to go on? But yeah, I mean, I think it's just because he's huddled up in a dark little area looking frightened, like extremely frightened, and just I guess kind of putting yourself in a situation of hiding like that. I think that that worked out extremely well. But yeah, it threw me for a curveball because I thought the same thing. It's like I wasn't thinking like they were trying to get this killer. I was thinking they're trying to attack this man. I don't know.
Like I found myself cheering for him, not them, almost, which was weird. And I think part of that is because it wasn't graphic or gory or violent. Like you didn't see him do anything evil. Yeah. You just knew, like, based on reputation. And so I think a major thing that the movie did purposefully was to bring out his humanity. And so that was just another way that was sort of reinforced. But
and it did it multiple times throughout the movie.
Yeah.
Like at the, towards the end of the movie, you definitely felt the empathy when you kind of realized what was going on, to him. But and with that scene too, I think maybe it could have been because you were watching the guy in the dark corner hiding, and you were hearing what was going on, almost like it was behind you. Yeah. So you were looking at the guy who was hiding, that was facing you. So you were kind of looking at his face, and you could see the fear and all that. And that was just good acting and good filming.
Yeah.
Or production.
Can we talk for a minute about the criminals? So I know that you said they brought in a bunch of real ones for that ending scene, and that's what we'll get to next. But just like the 4 or 5, I can't remember.
Yeah.
Like main criminal guys were just all like Dick Tracy comic book characters.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, they were for sure.
They were so ridiculous, and I loved it. There was like the guy who's like, "Oh yes, I'm a crime boss who does magic tricks."
Yeah. Oh, I know it, man. And also the fact that the whole room was just like constantly filled up with smoke from how much they smoked. Yeah. They were smoking like non-stop.
Yeah. Well, and
like, oh my god.
And like now, we complain a lot about like when you see a non-smoker pretending to smoke on screen, or like when people are smoking with unlit cigarettes and stuff like that's super distracting and terrible in movies. In this one, like, I'm surprised no one got the black lung from.
I know. They were legit all smoking.
Yeah, and like cigars. I mean, they weren't. Yeah, it was pretty funny. There were no.
Everyone was, but those the crime bosses for sure.
Yeah, you were like trying to see through the smoke to tell what was going on in the scene.
Yeah,
but it just like. If those were the crime bosses, Berlin was not hard in 1931.
I know it. Yeah, especially compared to now.
Yeah, exactly. So, but yeah, that was pretty funny. But yeah, so then in the ending scene, the criminals obviously are able to capture the killer and get away from the police, and they're dragging him through the distillery that's like abandoned on the edge of town, and he's struggling and yelling. And then they get to the basement, and it's just like a crowd of 100 completely silent, like angry-looking people standing there, like waiting to judge him. And then I thought it was really interesting that they kind of set up the little trial for him. Like they brought him a defense attorney for some reason, which again, like organized crime was not that tough in Berlin in 1931. It was interesting to me that the killer was talking like super openly about his own neuroses and mental illness and the drive to kill. And then there was the condemnation on the part of the killers, and there was even the bringing up of like, hey, some of you are killers too. Like, don't be so judgmental. Like, but then there was such a quick turnaround when the cops showed up, and then all of a sudden everybody was like, oh no, have mercy on us, even though we weren't willing to do that to him just like 5 minutes ago. And it was just really like the attitude of the crowd, depending on the presence of the police, I felt like was intended to give like a very 360 look of attitudes towards justice and punishment, which I thought was kind of a weighty topic for a movie in 1931.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. I think for me with the ending, that's where it makes you feel sorry for the killer. But for me though, the movie that I rented ended right after the police showed up. Like they just put their hands up and the movie ended. So I don't know if I caught the extra part at the end, but
so yours didn't have like the grieving mothers at the end? Okay. So the one that I watched, they are in the court and they're like coming up on about to read a verdict, but then it just cuts to the moms of the murdered children who who are dressed all in black, and the one in the middle is just basically saying like, this won't bring our children back. Like, hang on to your children and keep them safe.
Oh,
so
dang.
Yeah, so like they didn't even show like what the verdict from the trial was for the killer. Yeah. They just went to like the mother saying basically it doesn't matter. Like, whatever the court decides, like, our kids are still gone. And I've read that was one of the main themes that the director wanted to communicate with the movie, was just the idea of, take care of your kids. And I think that was an effective ending for
That's
that.
Intense.
So, yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah, that changes everything. I was just going to bring up the fact that you kind of talked about with the defense attorney when he said he's talking to like the main crime boss, and he's like, "You've killed 3 people yourself," and it was just immediately like, "That's neither here nor there."
Yeah,
and
exactly.
it goes on to the next. But, wow.
Yeah.
Boy, that's that makes sense.
Yeah.
So for me, as far as this movie goes, I don't necessarily think it's scary.
Agreed.
I feel like movies have built stories or have used this as a main influence to make other horror movies, kind of like what you're talking about with Silence of the Lambs and like Seven and a couple others.
Yeah.
You said they mentioned Seven in the list of the Esquire list, but they definitely built upon that. I could definitely see how it could be a horror movie back in 1931 or 33 or the 30s, but it's still though a fantastic movie. I thoroughly enjoyed the movie for this.
And I feel like Blood and Black Lace, for example, was a movie that influenced a lot of other movies in the future, but it wasn't really scary, and it also wasn't really a good movie. Whereas this one influenced a lot of things in the future, and it wasn't really scary, but it was a good movie. So it was worth watching. I would recommend it, but just don't expect to feel like horror while you're watching it. And so as far as like the list goes, I would rank it above Blood and Black Lace, but probably below the others as far as like horror.
Yeah, I agree.
There you go. Also, I just made you say that something that one of Russell's relatives did was good.
No, I looked it up. They spell it, they're different. I would never do that.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's him. And that's it for today's episode. If you've listened this far, then thank you, and we hope you've enjoyed it. We're always looking for new ideas, so if you have any questions, comments, or movie suggestions, please send us an email at thehorrificpod@gmail.com, or feel free to comment on or message our Facebook page. Just search for The Horrific Podcast. Thanks for listening.